Aoifinn Devitt, welcome to the show. I am excited about having money talks and talking about all the stuff that you're up to. Here on our show as we grow, not just as humans but financially. Conversations that we're going to have with you today are really important. So, Aoifinn Devitt, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
As we look at our financial world, there's a lot of conversations about, we've talked about how to make money and how to be an entrepreneur, how to grow a business, how to be a leader, great leader. But oftentimes, the part that us entrepreneurs struggle with is the financial side. In fact, I would say that I've never really worried about that. I've always made more money, and sometimes I forget to keep it. And that's where our strategies together will start to talk today. I really like to talk about how we can get into moving from making money to actually how we're going to start keeping money.
Great. Well, you have the secret sauce. That is the magic, right? Is making the money. I like to say what we do is actually quite simple. It's almost so simple that people don't believe how simple it is keeping the money. There are some very basic rules that we like to guide our clients around. And really what we are primarily is almost think of us as like that personal trainer, that coach, someone who has your back, but someone that will hold you accountable, and that someone that knows that the recipe, and that knows, also that knows that things change and that the backdrop will change. But our idea is to be a constant there, side by side with you as you think about your money journey, because it is a journey. We're not at the destination yet. We don't know what the end point is. So we need to be thinking about how we plan for that journey.
It's something that as soon as you say financial practices and start thinking this way, I think, oh my God, someone's going to put me on a budget. I don't want to be on a budget. But there's the next breath. I know that I know that that's where all the growth is. In every other part of my life, I've got a workout coach, I've got a spiritual coach, I've got a business coach. I've got a relationship coach. Or I call a therapist. That we work with. In recovery, I have a recovery coach, and sometimes we forget to do that same thing in our financial world. Finding someone, those things you talked about are really important to me. That piece is it's essentially a practice. I'm not always going to get right. I want someone to help guide me, but not beat me up.
It's funny, money is one of those constants in all of our lives, but it is such a lightning rod for emotions, for relationships to fall apart, for relationships to come together. And everybody has their money story. And I think that's where really the thinking is moving much more now. We're not thinking about simply beating the index and making the most money and seeing the largest returns. We're seeing that making your money chart your money story and the goals of where you want to get to. But before we can chart those goals, we need to see, well, what is your relationship with money and what is the psychology with which you treat money? And that is individual for every person. But we talked about this in a previous conversation on my podcast. We talked about your own history with money, perhaps, in growing up. And every single person will have that history around money. Some will have come from an atmosphere of plenty, and some will have come from an atmosphere of frugality and saving. Some will never lose that psychology, essentially. Some will have been born in an environment of high inflation. Our parents, grandparents talk about the time when inflation was in the teens and when essentially getting credit was not as easy as it was today. When you think about being born with inflation in the teens, therefore you don't ever consider inflation that we're experiencing today, up in high single digits, falling hopefully, but still, we've seen it around 6 or 7%. That seems like nothing. Whereas for the youth of today, that's been unprecedented. So we always have to look at what are the anchors in our head around money, and remembering that for some people, no matter how much they have, it'll never seem like enough. They will always worry about being out on the street, not being able to pay their electricity bill. And for some, there's not really a sense of much budget at all, that it is important for coaches like myself to work with them to think about putting those guardrails around their spending. So it all starts with psychology and the story you want to write with your money.
It's such a blind spot for me, right? When you talk about this, setting goals and setting up ideas around money. You're right. I have it's this blind spot. It's almost like I don't want to look over there, right? I just keep working my ass off every day. I get up every day. I grind. I grind. I grind. I grind. I grind. I grind. I know I'm making money. I see the growth in it, but the looking at it, I'm not sure where that hook is. I mean, as you talk about it, I have a money story, right? And start to identify that story and everything I have around it. For me, I identified, I have a story about, I want everybody to know that I'm not poor, right? I grew up in a very poor environment. I remember people made fun of me having, my pants having holes in them. And I've been trying to prove since I'm a little kid on that playground, I'm not poor. And that's why sometimes I will go to, rarely will you ever go out to dinner with me. Will I ever allow you to pay for the dinner? Right? Rarely will I go anywhere where I'm not flipping the bill. And some of that is in defense of that old story, and somewhere where I've gotten that shadow, right? We call it shadow work. And I can pull it around in front and go, oh, look at Anthony. He's still defending that little kid on the playground. And sometimes it's inappropriate. Like I'll be in places and people are like, no, I'm paying for dinner. I'm like, no, no, no. Because it's such an inbred story that I'm defending, that I even have a hard time breaking it when people are being generous or want to be generous. And, it can even become annoying.
Well, it's a very good point. And I think, first of all, it's great that you're talking about money in this way and your relationship with it, because that's one of the first things. I'm from Ireland. I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing. I don't think it's exclusive to Ireland, but there is a taboo around talking about money, particular around asking around salaries, how much one earns, how much one is worth, how much one can negotiate for. That's all taboo in our normal social interactions for the most part. It's particularly taboo around women I've had men on my podcast who've been quite comfortable saying that what drove them into finance was the desire to make money. That's not an emotion I hear explicitly coming from women. So first of all, we have to talk about money. We have to get more comfortable with our daughters, with our children, getting them to understand what they're worth. And if this is a lifestyle they want, what they're going to have to earn to get it. And so that's a conversation that we need to just kind of take out of the shadows. When it comes to our family's relationship with money, we have different generations. We've got parents who are going to be ultimately having to deal with their later years. There may be a succession planning. There may be money that needs to be passed in a will. We have to be able to have these conversations with our parents openly about money. It seems very taboo to ask someone how much they've saved, how much equity they have in their house. But we need to break through these taboos. Thankfully, we're seeing a lot of these consumer programs today around money. There's a great show on Netflix around how I can allow you to have a rich life. And just getting back to your spending on restaurants, we need to understand, like, what is it that makes us rich personally? What enriches our lives? Not simply the very fact of making money, but it may enrich you to have that generosity, to be generous when it comes to restaurants. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're spending money in an irrational fashion in other ways. That is what gives you your rich life. So you should be allowed to spend that and enjoy every penny of what you spend on other people in restaurants. So I think that there's no one rule for everyone, but what we need to determine is what is it that is important to you in terms of how you use your money. For some, that'll be college for their children. For some, that'll be a healthy retirement where they perhaps don't have a mortgage, they own their house outright. What we try to focus on with our clients is looking at income. We see some entrepreneurs who've made a lot of money early, but then they forget that they still will need an income between now and a point of if retirement, if ever. So where is that income coming from? Is it going to come from that pile of money that you've made? If that's the case, well, you better hope that there's a significant return being generated off those investments. On the other hand, if you don't intend to stop working, well, then we need to understand, well, what's the income you need to generate to sustain your lifestyle? And then we don't have to think as much about making the savings work, but we do need to think about whether the savings are certainly going to preserve their purchasing power. This is something we talked about earlier, but inflation obviously is in the news today. It's higher than before. We need to ensure that money is essentially making more than it would be stuffed under the mattress, which is the proverbial is stash for money, the safest place to put it, perhaps. It certainly seemed with the bank crisis that it was the safest place to put it. But we need to look at returns after inflation to ensure that your dollar today is going to be worth a dollar tomorrow on a post-inflation standpoint. So really focusing on income and again, looking at the lifestyle that is appropriate for the income that we're looking at.
When I think about retirement, and I understand I've got to have some, figure out what that is. I think it feels a lot like my health journey, right? It's so confusing when I go look at, what I should eat. How am I going to lose weight? How do I stay the healthiest? There's so many different pieces of advice that I get from the world about, this is the latest technology. Do this, eat sugars, eat carbs, do the carnivore, do the, it like I feel like a cat chasing a laser pointer, right? I'm always kind of like trying to jump at where the light's moving, and it's confusing. And I think that's why the value of bringing in a coach in and a financial advisor like yourself to really help guide that. Because if I don't get a conscious experience around creating a future that I can count on, right? What ends up happening is it leaves me feeling like I'm always behind, right? And without having a plan that I'm working on, that I can see progress on, something that I know I'm reaching a goal. Ultimately, what happens, the feeling I get is that I'm always behind, right? I get up in the morning, I feel like the dinosaurs are chasing me already. I'm behind on my plan. Oh my God, my wife and I going to be, somewhere, this lifestyle that we've created and that we enjoy at somewhere, I'm going to be living on a park bench. And it's funny how crazy that is, but I literally, there's a part of me, this underlying voice, or that voice in my head that's always saying, you're going to lose all this if you don't watch out, and that doesn't feel really happy. So this is where I really want to get into this conversation. Why I was so excited about having you on, right? As we start to look at that journey and create that future, right, and we start to create a plan that helps guide us. How do we start to really look at goals and income needs and spending power as I get into an older age, as I want to get into retirement? Like, I don't know that I'll ever completely retire, but somewhere where at least I don't have to do what I'm doing every morning, or the dinosaurs are going to eat me up.
Well, absolutely that. We set a roadmap. And the important thing is it's not just setting a destination and then setting it and forgetting it. When we have a roadmap for a financial plan, we are going to include all of those things that you mentioned. You talk about having your goals. We look at what would you like to be? When would retirement like to be for you? Someone like yourself, maybe there'll never be a real retirement in the traditional sense. But, in terms of whether is there a location you'd like to be? Is there a lifestyle you'd like to have? Perhaps some people want to have a boat down in Florida. Some people want to retire to a cabin. Some people want to travel. Well, there has to be a realistic calculation as to how much income is needed for all of that. There will be college education funds needed for children. There's a planning element of that, whether it's creation of trusts or savings accounts for children, and needing to know at that point how much goes into all of that. But I think what's key in what I'm hearing from you in terms of the security that a plan needs to give you is knowing, first of all, that it's not a set it and forget it type of plan. It is something that we iterate at all times. You will change. Your expectations will change. So we need to come back and actually adapt and see whether the plan needs to be modified, whether we need to have a course correction along that way. That's key, because I think that gives the assurance that we're not simply doing a box ticking exercise and then moving on to the next client. The important thing also, though, is you mentioned some of these dazzling new diets, perhaps, that people are told to follow, and in particular, the weight loss drug Ozempic now, which has been shown to have pretty significant dramatic results, but also long-lasting side effects. Well, the equivalent of that in the financial world is getting carried away with the shiny new objects, such as, say, Bitcoin or other digital assets, or just the other, or gold, or whether it's crypto or investing. We hear a lot, I want to invest in my buddy's dental practice, or this person's got this great biotech company that they're starting. I want to have a piece of that action. We get a lot of these, we call them kind of country club deals that come along that we have to obviously assess, but it's difficult the key thing is sizing a position like that, and also trying to steer a course that it only reserves a small amount of your capital for these kind of shiny new objects such as Bitcoin. How do we get to that? Well, we have a core allocation in a portfolio that we believe needs to be allocated, of course, across growth assets, real estate, income generating assets. And there's the idea that that's diversified and should be all weather. The idea being that this will stand you in good stead in all market environments. You can have a play account, you can have an allocation that you want it to play with, to be an angel investor or invest elsewhere. But that the key thing is keeping that limited in terms of size, and understanding that there could be the potential for total loss there, but that the rest of your portfolio is ring fenced and is not going to see that kind of volatility.
One of the things I noticed about my investment is that I've only really been really done really well in real estate. So I have a financial bias to it, right? When it comes to it, like, that's my ace in a hole. Like, my parents invest in real estate. I learned from them how to buy houses, rent them out, never sell houses, just keep renting them, fix them up, fix the doorknobs, fix the windows, increase the rents over a long period of time. There's been a natural propensity for me to really trust that investment, right? In good times, bad times, people renting houses, be a good landlord, don't overcharge people, keep your tenants in there, keep them happy. I know that well, right? And I've gone off to try some other things, which I would say I didn't know well. And I got, I'll give you an example. Last year, I invested in at the top of the market in all of this, uh, metaverse stuff. I took $100,000 and invested it into it, and I have half as much money today as I did then. I had to pick these 5 stocks. I watched a couple of videos. I had no real training, and I jumped into it, trying to do a forecast myself, and then it bit me, right? And then I say to myself, you see, you shouldn't have done that. And it kind of reinforces my own biases, which it's not fair, right? It's not fair because I didn't do that with consciously. I didn't. I kind of jumped into it really unconsciously, right? I kind of jumped into kind of emotional buy, and I had no. I didn't bounce it off of anybody. I just was sitting, in my office at late one night and thought, oh yeah, this is a great idea. I'll just do this. And there was no, I really I had no other thought in doing it. It's kind of like uh, I got what I got. Now I haven't sold them, so I really haven't lost the money yet. But it feels like I just reinforced my old biases.
Exactly, and this happens all the time. I quite like real estate as a core allocation. It makes perfect sense for you. You want to stay concentrated there. You know it. You're intimately involved. You have the inside information, you could say, in terms of how to make that succeed. What we like about real estate is it tends to be related to inflation. It can be quite diversified within it between, say, office or data centers or industrials. And so there's actually a kind of an all-weather component to real estate. It generates an income. That's important. It's inflation adjusted. I mentioned that's important. The problem with real estate is it's not always liquid. And you, I'm sure, are aware of this more than any. Just the moment when you think you need to liquidate, you really are a victim of market conditions, and you're going to be a price taker at the end. So there's always a bit of a uncertainty around valuation with real estate, because valuation is obviously the price someone's prepared to pay. So there's always going to be that element. So therefore, it's not good to have your entire portfolio in real estate, really primarily because of that lack of liquidity. But that said, it serves many investors extremely well. And most private individuals, that is one of the holdings they're most familiar with, as it should be. The thing about the metaverse, that's would naturally be on the more volatile end of the spectrum. So something like that needs to be sized accordingly. Equally, if your expertise was biotech and all of your holdings were in one biotech company, well, we'd say, well, that needs to be diversified a lot more than your real estate holdings, because your one biotech holding does have the propensity to lose everything or to be volatile, and we think you need to diversify. So having a home bias is not necessarily a bad thing. When it becomes a bad thing is when it's simply too volatile in its own right.
What's funny is my last poor investment was biotech. I got involved with a Merrill Lynch account. I had this broker. He was a broker for one of my richest friends at the time. I'm like, oh, you get to use my broker, and I was like, oh, great. I got, you must know something, and I lost 300 grand in one day. I mean, like one day. I'm like, okay, now shame on me. I didn't belong in that game. I was trying to act like this really rich friend of mine who was way financially successful, and to him, what he losing that much money was a toy, right? He probably made more interest in that in the day that I lost, and for me, it hurt me like it literally crippled. It was all the investment I had, and this biotech company missed this contract, and it failed it, and then all of a sudden somebody else came in, and it just I watched it crumble before I could even blink, and you know that's what happens, right? And then I have a biases, right? Then I wait, it was like maybe 15 more years since that happened. And I go do the same thing with metaverse. I jump into metaverse, and I do the same thing to myself. So I really do believe that this is where, you know, as an investor, you bring in that coach in, right? Same things happen with the diets. I can go through all the harebrained diets I've had that I've lost or there, and until I brought a nutritionist in and look at, all right, let's look at the fundamentals of what you're doing. One of the things my nutritionist really brought in was, hey, do you realize that you're addicted to sugar? You keep going through these sugar things, right? And why do you have a craving at night? And I couldn't see that. Now, as I start to look at my financial world with a group like yourself that brings in that conscious behavior training, how do you start to set that up for somebody? How do you start to look at the picture? How do you start to really look at the biases? How do you start to look at a plan and set goals? Try to chart that out.
Well, it's really interesting. This is the most exciting and developing area within wealth management right now is the focus on behavior. There's a whole atmosphere of this chief behavioral officer and focusing on behavioral biases. The key thing is reflexivity, though. As an advisor, we have to also focus on our own biases. What's our own story with money? We just can't go and expect that everyone has had the same experience as we have. So we have to have the ability to be objective. But starting with an individual, we go, as I said before, we go back to the psychology of their own money story, where it came from. And then we look at, the classic behavioral tools we know is just like you mentioned with that biotech loss. We do tend to feel our losses more severely than our gains. We will nurse those losses. We will dwell and ruminate over those losses. And we may not actually celebrate our gains. We just got to discount them and bank them. So what we need to do is look at that rumination and learn lessons essentially from what you experienced. Maybe you did all the due diligence you could have done. It was unfortunate, bad market. But if you'd sized that inappropriately, lost more than you were willing to bear, well, that's a lesson that you learn and take through to the future. So that's the kind of analysis we would do. You also mentioned, this is a very common phenomenon now in markets, which is FOMO, the fear of missing out. We see this around tech stocks. We see this around Bitcoin. And then we also the phenomenon of getting burned and experience that loss and never wanting to go back in again. There's a whole crowd of investors who may have invested in Bitcoin, got their fingers burned, and are now have sworn off it. So they're essentially no longer tourists in the space. So we can see that takes at least a few years to kind of digest a loss that has been perhaps as dramatic as that. But there's a thing called muscle memory as well. And that's what we're attributing to why tech stocks are doing so well. Now we're recording this just in the beginning of the second half of 23. Why are tech stocks doing so well again? Well, there's a bit of hype in there, a bit of AI, artificial intelligence, and the hype cycle that's running through tech. But there's also the muscle memory. This is where investors made money before. They made it in tech. It's what they're used to doing. It's what they're used to doing is buying the big tech stocks. You can't lose money buying IBM or the equivalent of the other big stocks. So they're repeating that pattern over again. And what we're trying to do is to coach investors to see the bigger picture, look outside the tech stocks. If you put all your money into not metaverse, but a single, say, a pharmaceutical chain or pharmacy chain, I won't mention the name, you would have done just fine. So it's not about necessarily the size of the investment at times. Sometimes it's just about how volatile that investment was.
I had no real guidance on it. So as you start to really set up a plan and start to look at, someone's investment portfolio, we're speaking to the audience, and you're going to go out there and do this assessment, right? How do you start to do a true assessment of an inventory of your financial world? What's the starting point? Is that what's the questionnaire? How do you get the information out so you kind of know, all right, let's look at an inventory of what I have.
It's exactly as you said. It's an inventory. We look at the portfolio today. It may have come from another financial advisor. It may just be in someone's bank account or brokerage account. We look at what they own, and then we conduct essentially as a questionnaire. We try to make it more of an interview than a kind of a fill out the blanks, because I think that's when you really get the interaction with the person, and you get to hear their answers. That's when you start to look at their stage of life, their earning potential, whether how that's likely to evolve, their dependents and their needs and their expenses, and the other side of the income statement. And then then we start to look at goals. And what is it that you want to achieve in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And then we work backwards. If you want to retire, say in 15 years, what you need to be doing today, what you have in terms of retirement plans in place, savings plans in place, are you optimizing for tax structure in that? The classic example is, an employer match 401k. Hopefully that's a given that most employees will be participating in that if that's what they have. But sometimes there are this low hanging fruit that is not being taken advantage of. And not all fruit is low hanging, of course. So the low hanging fruit is the easy part in terms of optimizing for tax efficiency there. Then we would have to look later at perhaps if there's more a complex situation, how could trust be structured, or how should an estate be structured so that we can look at optimizing the tax. Then when it comes to the investments themselves, we are conscious that these are tax paying clients. So we need to look at, well, what is the after tax benefit of, say, investing in this asset class or that asset class, and is therefore what the appropriate allocation to those asset classes are.
You said a lot in that conversation, and I want to kind of go back to a couple of things that really registered with me. I filled out those questionnaires before. In fact, maybe that's not even true. I've actually never completed one. I've had a couple of financial advisors come in the picture, and they go, "Well, here." They give me this I don't know 20-page or 30-page asset assessment package, and just the funny experience that I have is that as I did it, I just had all these hooks that shut me down from it. Like literally what you said about doing it with your client, that's a gift, right? Having a financial person kind of walk through that with you. Cause I could just tell you that while I did it, while I was filling that out, all kinds of things came up. And what I noticed is my brain wanted to distract itself from it. It didn't have all the answers properly. So I started getting confusing, and I kind of noticed that my brain does this thing where it doesn't have all the answers. It starts to get the I don't knows, and I don't know, I'll figure it out. I'll come back to it. And then I never get back to it. It becomes this like dark spot in my memory, right? It's almost like my brain shuts down because it doesn't have the answers. And having someone to kind of guide through that and go, it's okay. We don't need that answer right now. Let's go on to the next item. Someone that's what I feel like when you said that about how you guide your clients, that's a big deal, right? I feel like that's a different level of coaching where you walk through it because there's so many triggers in that assessment package that I just judge, when you were saying that, I'm like, I actually never filled one of those out. I've had several of them, but I've never completed one because I get to a point and I blank out. And feel good to have someone who actually walked through that with me and helped me go through that. And that feels a little sad, right? Like you couldn't do it yourself, but it also, I don't know what it is, but there's so many triggers in that conversation.
Well, it's a deeply personal set of questions that are there around money. I mean, certainly all of us, I think, would try to guard that and be private. And maybe there's an element of shame around money. I mean, there are so many emotions that are involved in that. And I'm like you, I hate filling out questionnaires. And I do get a bit disassociated from them at times and might kind of tick the middle box, average. And am I going to be able to really give you an assessment of my risk tolerance? Am I an aggressive investor, conservative investor, moderate investor based on that? I think that's completely starting from the wrong point. The most important relationship you could have with your financial advisor is one of trust. And you're going to build that trust through setting up those interviews at the beginning when we're learning about each other. And then simply, we're both podcast hosts. You know how much I know how much I have grown personally in the 3 years that I've been doing podcasts. And what has it done? It's because it's taught me to listen. It has taught me the deeply humbling effect of sitting at the other end of a mic when the guest is speaking maybe 90% of the time and I'm speaking 10% of the time. Because when you're truly listening in an engaged way, that's something we so rarely do in everyday life, you can really start to understand the person. And you mentioned the word gift. That is a gift. Giving that listening to a client is a true gift that they appreciate and they start to open up. And I think I've been amazed and humbled at how guests have opened up to me on podcasts simply because I'm listening and I'm asking and I'm interested. And that's what clients do too. When you listen and are engaged and interested in them and in helping them and guiding them, they start to open up to you too. And that's when you can hear what my friend Brian Portnoy describes as the question behind the question. They may ask a question about where should I be invested, but what are they really asking? Is it, am I going to be okay? What do I need to get to point X? And am I going to be okay? And that's the basic human survival question that is so much more than where should I invest my money?
The how do you really start to once you get in that trust area, how do you start to get and understand someone's risk tolerance, right? How do you start to understand that piece, right? So, what's that combination? How do you start to figure out? All right, this is what their risk tolerance is, and create a safe space for them to step into it.
Great question. And it gets us when we start getting almost deep into the psychology because we have to go back. I mean, someone like yourself that has been in real estate and construction, not perhaps an area where you have to have a certain amount of street smarts and you've got to tolerate a reasonable amount of loss. I would glean your risk tolerance from knowing your story. I'm not going to know it exactly, but I'm going to have a sense as to where I can put you on the spectrum. So the first part of that risk tolerance question is asking the question, where were they born? What have they studied? What have they done in their career? What is their history of their investments? Have they, ask them about a loss. Like, did they sell that house at a loss? How do they make them feel? Did they learn any lessons from that? And then we get a feel for, is this person really all about capital preservation, or do they have a tolerance for loss if they've, say, invested in tech stocks before, done well, lost some money, had been a day trader like many people have been. So that's how we start to get a feel. But it's reflecting on those losses and seeing how it made them feel, and knowing then what kind of is on the spectrum of where they might be able to invest. That's where, and also is also, I suppose, also painting the picture of the way that most investments will perform. Just because something has had a great run, say looking at US equity markets, doesn't mean they can't have a year like last year. So just reminding, and remember, we're in a generation now when many young individuals have never experienced a recession. So, I've experienced, I think it's three and counting. But at the same time, that is increasingly a minority of the working population.
It's absolutely it's humbling, right? Having gone through a couple of recessions myself, I have been humbled, and you learn some you learn some gifts from that, right? When you get humbled and the pain of going through down cycles, and then that really changed my investment portfolio even today. As I look at my investment portfolio today, I'm always kind of thinking and setting up for my retirement, right? Even the money that I make in the investments today, I'm always reinvesting in preparation for my future retirement finances, right? And trying to figure out, that number keeps changing, right? How much am I going to need per month when I retire, right? Is it X? Is it Y? Where does that stop? And today, where I thought I needed to retire, and what I believe I need to retire today, it's almost 3 times as much. Now, I don't know how real that is because I'm not there yet, but I kind of base, my retirement spending on a little bit on the spending I have today, how we like to travel, how my wife and I like to live, the homes that we like to be in, the cars we like to drive. And, I kind of look at my retirement and going, all right, if I'm not going to make any income, how much income do I need from my investments to get me to the finish line?
Well, that's exactly why we have to look at income and you build it in as a real return, i.e., what's it going to be after inflation, building in a reasonable level of inflation to ensure that you're not simply keeping pace with inflation. Your investments need to be actually growing. But also, this is where I used to work in the pension fund arena, and where we can borrow from the institutional world for our private portfolios. Pension funds put in place something like a glide path. Most pension funds will not be in existence forever, so they know that as they're winding down towards the end, they can be selling their assets in order to make their payments. So just say you can put in place a glide path as well. You may own rental properties that you don't necessarily need to continue to. You can actually start to cash them in later years as you want to enjoy those that windfall, or just simply a lump sum coming from an investment like that. So it's about constantly iterating, as I said, not expecting one pile of capital to simply do you now for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, the problem you're experiencing is one that we're experiencing on a widespread basis across the world. People simply having to work longer and having to realize that. And that's why we really need to inject this financial literacy. We speak about financial literacy now as if it's something you teach at high school and you're done. Actually, financial literacy is to be a lifelong pursuit. And now, in fact, it has to not just include, how a credit card works, how a checkbook is balanced, which of course we nobody needs to learn anymore, but how to avoid being scammed. I mean, the cybersecurity and the way that these fraudsters are essentially taking advantage of not just older people, I might add, everyone across the board, knowing that being alert to that, I think that's our duty as financial advisors to provide the financial literacy along the path.
It's scary how well they're doing in this financial scam word. We just got taken for $44,000 for a check. It was an amazing scam. That I was impressed with how genius these people are. But I was mad about the whole thing. But it's like my bank couldn't even figure out. It was, they had we had a subcontractor payment due, and our project manager said, "Yep, okay to pay." They qualified; it was right time to pay. And in the email, they sent it over as a qualification. It came back with with the account numbers of payment apps and all that. And our company did at the time, we weren't calling to verify those account numbers. It was literally on there. It was attached to the emails that were in there. It grabbed the email, changed the account numbers, and sent it back. It looked identical to the emails that were in the string that were before. It was exactly there. No one even questioned it. We figured that's their routing numbers, and we paid them $44,000. We promised we'd pay them that week. We said, "Look, you get your work done. We'll get you paid this week." And we did that. They got the work done, and we paid them immediately. And the guy called me up on Tuesday. It was like Friday. We sent him the money. And he calls me up on Tuesday. "You liar! You can't." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? We sent it to you an hour after your request. We sent it to this Wells Fargo." Well, he goes, "Wells Fargo? What are you talking about, Wells Fargo? We don't Wells Fargo. We Bank of America." And I'm like, "What?" And we went through this experience. I'm like, "What?" And like that sense of shock that came over me. Now today we have a different practice. Now we call, we verify, we do a couple steps to make sure that it's a live thing. But it's just it goes to say that we got to be more vigilant than ever, and having a coach that helps guide you. Like, look, what are your financial practices? How are you paying things? How are you handling the investments? All of that stuff, I think, has to be brought up with your financial coach.
Exactly. And sometimes what some of our advisors are also business coaches as well. I mean, that's how they start building this trust with the executives, and then the executives use them on their private side as well. But the other thing about these scams, just the final point of that, is you mentioned the sense of shock. I think more importantly, there's also a sense of shame. And I think that that's important, that, some people, because of the shame, will not discuss it. They will not admit it. They will not learn from it. Or they won't discuss it with anyone and prevent it happening again. So we're often asked to predict the markets and predict what a portfolio is going to do. And I try to shy away from any kind of prediction, because I think what I've heard is that the only thing you learn from prediction is more about the predictor and not about the future, because really nobody can predict the future. But what we can do is prepare. And that preparation, though, the key thing is that it's never finished. It's a constant state of preparation. That may be frustrating for some people who want to just say, "Okay, I'm done. That's my financial plan now. It's in the drawer and I'll live by it." Unfortunately, we do need to adapt. We're in a living, breathing world that is dynamic. We need to readjust that, but we have to prepare, and learning from our mistakes and not attaching shame to them is how we do that.
All right. So the last big point I want to get into, and this is one of my ones that's frustrating, as we start to look at tax consequences, right? Because the place I think I'm most frustrated is when I notice I pay these enormous tax bills. I remember the first time I paid, north of six figures on a tax bill, and I realized I didn't get a discount card for the beach. I didn't get a skipped a line at the bank. I didn't get IRS coming by and saying thank you. I just paid this enormous tax bill, and I was frustrated in that I hadn't done a better job of finding ways to mitigate that well before I was there. Right, working with a financial advisor, how do I start to look at those risks and those I start to mitigate those expenditures?
That's what we're not tax advisors, but we do work with tax advisors, and that's key. Is that we have people who are keeping abreast of changes in the tax code, looking at your status, looking at your holdings. Are they optimized for tax right now? Are they in the right structures? Are they, for example, do you have the right trusts in place? There are many ways to ensure that we can look at today's position and ensure that that is optimized, and that will then inform the investments you invest in, because knowing what you pay in taxes, we will say, well, does this make sense? This investment, does that make sense? And we will not waste time essentially pursuing investments that on an after tax basis aren't appropriate. When it comes to, say, a sale such as that in capital gains tax, that's again where tax advice comes in. Unfortunately, death and taxes are the two things that one can't avoid, but certainly having the right level of advice. And that's exactly is our role, is ensuring that you are paired with the right tax and estates advisors, a trust and estates advisor, in order to ensure that that is optimized.
Well, I think even more important, that it's just having you there to guide me through that conversation, right? Look, as a total package in putting that together, looking at my financial world, right? I need help even having that conversation, right? It's I'm sorry to say that, but as I get a financial advisor, as I get a financial coach, look, even having that one there, being honest about where I'm at, what my impacts are, taking those blinders off excuse me, taking those blinders off are it's a lot of fun to do that. And Evan, that's the gift that you and your team are, and the work that you're doing. I'm as we continue to unfold our financial world, as I continue to have more series with you in the work that we're doing in the financial world. First, I say thank you for coming on here and helping guide our audience to these ideas, right? To really start to look at that, bring those shadows out in front of ourselves, and you know, have a little grace for ourselves that, okay, look, all right, even though we're afraid to do this, now is the time to do it as soon as possible. Get engaged with a financial planner, a financial coach, to help you through this work, just like you do with every other part of our life. And if I would have known earlier the benefits of having coaches in my life, if I would have known the outcome of the backside of it, I would have done this faster. Right? I never, after having a business coach change my business world, today, I don't know why every business person doesn't have a business coach. Having a health person help my nutrition person help my health process. Now I'm losing on a good diet. I'm feeling healthier than I've ever been. I don't know why I wouldn't have done that faster, right? I just, to our audience, I want to really say that now's the time to do this. This is the time where you grab a group like Evan's group, and you really look at your financial world, even if it's scary and uncomfortable and you don't have all the answers and you don't have it all figured out. Now's the time to do that. Faster we get into it, the faster we start to look at it, and the better the long-term results we get to have with that.
And yeah, and I would just leave with the words. I mean, I love the talking about the concept of comfort zones. And on my podcast, I've learned two things about comfort zones. That's where the edge of the comfort zone is where the magic happens. It's also where the terror happens. And when I say one has to get the money conversations out of your comfort zone, it means out of the comfort zone we can actually start talking about it. We can start being open about it, disassociating it from shame and from secrecy and from a sense of incompetence. None of us knows all the answers. But when we can get outside the comfort zone to have these conversations, and I don't mean outside the comfort zone in terms of risk tolerance, simply having these conversations, understanding them, that's where the magic happens.
Well, Aoifinn Devitt, thank you very much for being on this podcast. I want our audience to come check out your podcast. It's an amazing podcast. So let's do a little plug for your podcast.
Yeah, so the 50 Faces podcast is a podcast platform that I started in 2020. It was with the desire to tell the stories of individuals that I thought had not been heard. I wanted to showcase a diverse group of role models in the world of finance, to tell their stories, show their career trajectories, speak about what's on their mind, and reflect on some of the people that made them who they are and some of the wisdom that has guided them, in order that we can share that, amplify that, and have it guide the next generation.
Well, Aoifinn, you certainly are a wise guide, for each and every one of us. Your group and the work that you do are phenomenal. Having a coach in our lives like yourself to guide us through this ever-changing financial world is a gift. If people want to get a hold of you, beside the podcast, they want to get a hold of you and your company, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm at Moneta. So you can find me at Moneta Group. You can also always find me on LinkedIn, which carries me throughout my career. And 50faceshub.com is the podcast platform.
We'll put all the links to that down below. Audience, as always, if you got questions or you got comments, something you want to say about the podcast, please take a second right now and put that down there. Evan and I really get, it brings much joy to hear your comments, whatever they are, whatever good or bad or questions or something you want to say about something we said. Look, start the dialogue. That's the gift of having a podcast, is that together we ask questions, we work on ideas, and we grow, a new perspective that we probably didn't have before we started this. So thank you very much. Take a second and like and subscribe now. That would be great.